Well, folks, President Trump has done it again. He just exposed a 32-point midterm gap on the Save America Act. And this gives Republicans a new parallel strategy. And his team has actually showed this to Senate and House Republicans. And it's something I don't think anybody following the Save America Act or the midterms really expected. So here's what happened. His team actually poll tested the Save America Act against multiple Republican-led issues, and that included healthcare. And according to the reporting that's been exposed, the Save message produced a 14-point advantage over the Democrats. Now, the healthcare message produced a 46-point advantage. But before anybody gets upset and says, hey, President Trump's abandoning election integrity, I want you to know that that's not what happened. Okay. In fact, the Save America Act still tested positively, and the president is still fighting for it pretty hard. But I think the narrative that's going to be pushed, especially by the media and the left, is that the president is pushing the Save America Act out of consideration because the fight is too tough. But I think what the president is trying to do, and what he will do ultimately, is separate the fight he wants to win in Washington from the message that he knows voters want to hear, that Republicans have to use to win the midterms. Okay? Because if that's what we're watching, then the Republican midterm strategy, I think, is becoming a lot clearer. And look, there are three receipts here that I think we need to consider and put all together. Number one is the polling. Number two is the money. And third is the battlefield that President Trump has already spent the last several months building. Now, I want to start with what actually happened. Okay. According to Axios, some of Trump's top political people briefed Republican senators and House and their aides last week. James Blair was there. Ironically, James Blair used to be my campaign manager. He's number 3 in the White House. Tony Fabrizio, President Trump's longtime pollster, also was my pollster as well. And Alex Latcham, the executive director for the Senate Leadership Fund, was there. Okay, these aren't random political consultants around, sitting around throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks. These are people who are involved in deciding how Republicans are going to fight for control of the Senate and the House, the Congress this November. And they brought message testing with them. Okay, the number that immediately jumped out to me is the one talks about healthcare. Look at this, 46 plus 46. Okay. Republicans have a 46-point advantage when we talk about greater transparency from health insurance companies. Talk about profits, claim denials, how long patients have to wait for care, and Democrats protecting the insurance companies instead of the patients. 46 points. Now look at the SAVE Act. Republicans, we still have a 14-point advantage there. That's not a losing issue, okay? Axios has reported that, the polling shows that voters still prefer a Republican supporting the SAVE Act by double digits over a Democrat who's opposing it. So the Save America Act, didn't suddenly become unpopular or, some political poison pill. It still wins. But apparently healthcare wins by a hell of a lot more. And that's where I think the story becomes much bigger than a polling memo. Because think about what President Trump has been doing. Okay, for months, he's been hammering the Senate over the Save America Act, proof of citizenship, voter ID, election integrity. His administration's pursued election-related action through the DOJ, DHS. I mean, we've watched the broader fight move through Congress. We've watched it go through the federal agencies, the courts, and elements of SAVE have also been discussed for a possible reconciliation process. And we all know what happened just before the August recess. The Senate left the Save America Act off its agenda while another reconciliation process remained only a possibility. And we've all been pretty critical of Senator Thune over that. And we still are. But the August recess wasn't a surprise. The 60-vote problem wasn't something new. And reconciliation wasn't invented that Friday night. Okay. They should have been ready. We all know this. But the distinction that I want to make here is that winning the Save America Act fight and winning the 2026 midterms are not necessarily the same political operation. Okay. They may be, maybe that's the part we've been missing. Because if you're President Trump, your objective isn't simply to pass one bill, it's to keep the House and keep the Senate, advance his America First agenda, and ultimately prevent Democrats from taking control of Congress for the final 2 years of his presidency, and ultimately execute on the mandate that he introduced that we agreed upon and voted him into office for. So, look, imagine that you're sitting there looking at these numbers. Save America Act plus 14, healthcare plus 46. What do? Well, you don't abandon the plus 14 issue. You don't abandon what the majority of Americans have agreed upon. You continue fighting for it, but you put your political money behind the plus 46 issue in the races where it can move the most voters. And that's not a retreat. It's targeting. It's chess. And look, now we get to the second receipt. It's money. Okay, MAGA Inc. We've talked about this. President Trump's Alliance Super PAC had more than $400 million reported in June. That's a huge, huge amount of political firepower. And reporting at that same time indicated that they'd barely begun using it in any federal races. And now we're being told that James Blair says that Republicans should expect MAGA Inc. and the Republican National Committee money to start flowing into their midterm races. And President Trump has also gone on record about this super PAC, and he says that he personally controls it. And he can spend the money on pretty much anything he wants. Now you can see why this polling matters. Because we're not talking about somebody at a think tank running a survey and writing a white paper. We're talking about the people helping decide how hundreds of millions of dollars can be deployed into midterms, all sitting down with Republican members of Congress and showing them where the biggest message advantages reside. That makes this actionable intelligence. And if that money starts moving behind this message, we're going to know exactly what they decide. Now, here's where I think Trump's strategy could become pretty clever. Republicans have traditionally had a vulnerability on healthcare. Democrats know it. Republicans know it. Many of you know it. You feel it. Okay. Every consultant in Washington, D.C. knows it as well. So what happens if Trump takes an issue Democrats believe belongs to them and changes the argument? Don't make it Obamacare versus repeal Obamacare. Don't make it another 4,000-page Washington healthcare plan. Make it something like, why did your insurance company deny your claim? Why are you waiting 3 months to see a specialist? Why are your premiums so expensive? How much money is the insurance company making while you are fighting them to cover your kids' procedures? And which politicians are protecting these systems? That's a completely different argument. And apparently, it's devastating because that's what Trump will do. Now, put that beside election integrity. Trump doesn't need to stop talking about the Save America Act. He just needs Senate Republicans to finish the damn job. Okay. That's what I've been saying. It's what you've been saying. We've all been saying it. Okay. They're in recess now. I know they're in constant communication. They have this time to do their negotiations. They have to use August. They have to build the reconciliation framework. They have to figure out what survives the Byrd rule. They have to find their votes. They have to come back in September and put something on the floor. But while they're doing that, President Trump can move the political campaign into terrain where Democrats apparently have an even bigger problem. And that's what a Trump political strategist executes. You don't fight every battle with the same weapon. You don't. Not if you're President Trump. Hell, people don't even know what your weapons are if you're him. Now look, folks, If you want the receipts separated from the spin, subscribe, because we're going to keep this moving. All right. Now, this is where I want to give you the strongest argument against my interpretation or any. Okay. Maybe this is nothing more than normal political consulting. I mean, campaigns test, right? Multiple messages. One message performs better than another. We all know that happens. Consultants will tell candidates about it. It's all possible. Okay. We don't have the underlying polling questionnaire in front of us. Here's what we know, though. Tony Fabrizio is a genius. He's been Trump's pollster for years. Okay. He knows what he's doing. But I think we still need to see the complete methodology. You know, I'm curious. I want to know exactly how these questions were worded. I want to know which voters were sampled. I want to know whether these people were given, questions because they're persuasion voters, they're likely voters, they're registered voters, independents, or, is it some combination? Because wording matters in polling. We know that. But still think this is significant because this is Tony Fabrizio. Okay. And the people receiving the information were members of Congress and their aides. Okay, the people delivering it, included President Trump's top political operators. Okay, his pollster, his executive director, and the guy running the Senate Leadership Fund. And the discussion was happening just as Trump's enormous political war chest is prepping to enter races across the country. And those three things all together, that's not theoretical. That's the beginning of a strategy. So now I think we have three things that we need to watch. Okay, number one, we have to watch the ads. Okay. Because when MAGA Inc. starts spending serious money, we have to see what these ads actually say. If you suddenly start seeing, the Republican Senate candidates hammering insurance companies, hammering denied claims, healthcare costs, and maybe Democrats, in their relationships with the insurance companies, well, we'll know this presentation wasn't just informational. It was really a playbook. Number two, we have to watch the president. Is he going to start adding his healthcare argument into rallies and speeches? Because we all know President Trump is very good at taking a complicated policy problem and thinking through it to a point where he's reduced it into something everybody can understand right away. That's where he shines. Now, if he starts talking about insurance companies getting rich while Americans get denied care, pay attention. And number three, watch the Save America Act, because this is the most important test of my interpretation. If Trump continues hammering John Thune and Republicans to finish the act while simultaneously shifting the midterm campaign message toward healthcare, then we know these aren't competing strategies. They're just two different operations. One is governing and the other is winning in November. And ultimately, I think Trump realizes and is going to deploy both. I spent a lot of time on this channel telling you President Trump is changing the battlefield. And I think right now we're watching him do it again. Because election integrity forces Democrats and Republicans into positions they would rather avoid. Healthcare takes one of the Democrats' traditional strengths and turns it into a liability. And sitting behind all of this is more than $400 million in Trump-aligned political firepower that has barely been deployed in federal races. And that is the board. So my takeaway is not that President Trump is abandoning the Save America Act, and the media is going to lie about that. Okay, the data we have doesn't support it. His political operatives have just identified another weapon for November. And if their internal testing is right, it's a much bigger one than anybody has expected. Now, if you talk to regular Americans, especially those of you who are retired or getting close to retirement, healthcare is a huge concern of yours. I know that. I've heard it. And President Trump sees that number now in front of him. Okay. So if I'm running his midterm operation, I'm not going to choose between these two things. I'm going to use both of them. I make the Senate Republicans deliver on election integrity, and I take that $400 million war chest that I have and force Democrats to define the healthcare system that Americans have to routinely fight with because of their bad and terrible policy positions. That's a very different midterm battlefield. And now we get to watch where the money goes. So let me know what you think, folks. You think President Trump is going to keep hammering the Save America Act and make healthcare the major Republican campaign message heading into November? Do you think he should? Again, because if this private message test holds up, I think we may have just gotten our first look at a very diverse Trump midterm election playbook. I love to see it.